The galaxy had been peaceful and quiet for almost 900,000 years. It was a time when nobody talked about humans anymore because they had simply vanished without a trace. Most aliens thought humans were gone forever, probably destroyed by some disaster or war that wiped them out completely. During all these long years, a huge group called the Zephyrian Collective had grown bigger and stronger. This wasn't just one alien race, but 800 different species working together like a massive team. They had explored every corner of space where humans used to live, collecting anything they could find that humans had left behind. Aliens found it quite amusing to look at human artifacts in their museums. There were these small rectangular devices called smartphones that humans apparently used to communicate with each other. The aliens would point and laugh, wondering how such primitive creatures managed to survive using such basic technology. They also found old cars with combustion engines that burned fossil fuels, which seemed incredibly wasteful and backward to species that had mastered clean energy centuries ago. But what made the aliens laugh the most were the nuclear weapons. These were bombs that could destroy entire cities. Yet they were so crude and dangerous that they could barely be aimed properly. The museum guides would tell visitors that humans were so primitive they hadn't even figured out how to travel faster than light speed. While other civilizations were zipping across galaxies in mere days, humans were stuck crawling through space at snail's pace. The Zephyrian Collective built their entire empire on top of what used to be human territory. They had cities on planets where humans once lived, space stations and solar systems that humans had barely begun to explore, and trade routes through areas that humans had only dreamed of reaching. To them, humans were just another extinct species that couldn't adapt to the harsh realities of the universe. Then something incredible happened that nobody expected. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, deep space monitoring stations started picking up strange signals. These weren't random space noise or natural phenomena from dying stars. These were organized, purposeful transmissions coming from one very specific location, the Sol System, which used to be humanity's home. The first alien scientist to detect the signals thought his equipment was broken. He ran diagnostics 3 times before realizing the signals were real. Within minutes, monitoring stations across 17 different sectors of space were all reporting the same thing. Organized radio transmissions were coming from Earth's solar system, and they were clearly artificial. But the content of these messages was what really shocked everyone. Instead of aggressive demands or desperate pleas for help, the messages were incredibly polite and casual. They sounded like someone who had just woken up from a long sleep and was casually greeting their neighbors. The main message that kept repeating was simple but mind-boggling. "Hello, galactic neighbors. We're back from our little nap. Hope we haven't missed anything important. Please respond at your convenience. Signed, Humanity Management Division." The word Management Division made alien leaders across the galaxy burst into laughter. Management implied organization, structure, and most importantly, the ability to manage complex systems. How could a species that couldn't even leave their own solar system properly have something as sophisticated as a management division? Admiral Vexstar was the commanding officer of the Zephyrian Navy, their most powerful military force. He was a tall, imposing figure with blue-green skin and gill slits that fluttered when he was amused or excited. When he heard about the human messages, he laughed so hard that his gill slits opened and closed rapidly, which was basically the alien equivalent of someone laughing until they couldn't breathe. "Management Division," he repeated to his officers, wiping tears from his large, dark eyes. "These primitives think they have management. What's next? Are they going to claim they have a space program?" His entire bridge crew joined in the laughter. The idea that humans, who had been considered extinct for nearly 1,000,000 years, suddenly had the audacity to call themselves a management division was the funniest thing they had heard in decades. Admiral Vexstar immediately saw this as an opportunity. If humans had somehow survived and were now making contact, it meant there might be valuable resources or territory to claim in the Sol System. More importantly, it would be an easy victory for the Zephyrian Navy. They could swoop in, deal with whatever primitive humans had managed to survive, and claim the entire solar system as a trophy. Within just a few hours, Admiral Vextar had assembled a massive conquest fleet. 3,000 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy were loaded with weapons, troops, and mining equipment. These weren't just any ships. They were vessels capable of destroying entire planets if necessary. Each ship was equipped with plasma cannons that could melt through solid rock, energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, and faster-than-light engines that could cross the galaxy in days. The fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, confident that they would arrive at the Sol system to find a few scattered human settlements that could be easily conquered. Admiral Vextar imagined returning home as a hero, the officer who had finally finished what the universe had started nearly a million years ago, the complete elimination of humanity. But something went wrong with their plan. Something went very, very wrong. The massive Zephyrian fleet, with all its advanced technology and overwhelming firepower, never made it past Jupiter. The massive Zephyrian fleet of 3,000 warships suddenly dropped out of hyperspace near Jupiter, their engines creating brilliant flashes of light as they returned to normal space. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, expecting to see a primitive solar system with maybe a few small space stations and some basic satellites orbiting the planets. He was already planning his victory speech and thinking about which planet would make the best trophy for his personal collection. But what the Admiral saw through his viewing screen made his jaw drop and his gill slits freeze in complete shock. The Sol system had been completely transformed into something that looked like it came from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Massive orbital installations, each one easily the size of a small moon, were positioned around every major planet. These weren't crude metal structures held together with bolts and hope. They were sleek, elegant constructions that seemed to shimmer with energy, their surfaces covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly because they seemed to shift and change in impossible ways. Space elevators stretched from the surfaces of planets up into orbit. But these weren't the simple cable and counterweight systems that most civilizations used. These elevators looked like they were made of pure light, glowing ribbons that extended so far into space that their tops disappeared into the darkness. Ships were moving up and down these elevators constantly, carrying cargo and passengers with an efficiency that made the Zephyrian logistics cores look like amateurs. But the most shocking sight was the welcoming committee waiting for them, floating in space. Completely unprotected, except for transparent spheres that surrounded them like giant soap bubbles, were dozens of humans. But these weren't the primitive cavemen that Admiral Vextar had expected to find. These humans were wearing perfectly tailored business suits, carrying briefcases, and some were even holding coffee cups. They looked like they were about to attend a corporate meeting, not greet an invasion fleet in the vacuum of space. One of the humans, a woman with short black hair and a confident smile, stepped forward in her protective sphere. The sphere somehow amplified her voice so that it was broadcast directly into every Zephyrian ship's communication system with crystal clear quality. "Welcome to Sol Incorporated," announced Hannah Kim, Director of Galactic Relations, her voice cheerful and professional, like a hotel receptionist greeting valued guests. "We're so sorry about the inconvenience, but you're currently trespassing in a designated reconstruction zone. For your safety and ours, we'll need you to fill out forms 847B through 932F before we can properly process your visit." The bridge of Admiral Vextar's flagship fell completely silent. His officers stared at their screens in confusion, wondering if they had somehow jumped to the wrong solar system. This couldn't be the same place where primitive humans had once lived. It looked like the capital system of a major galactic power. Admiral Vextar's shock quickly turned to rage. He had brought 3,000 warships to conquer some primitive survivors, not to fill out paperwork for what appeared to be a cosmic bureaucracy. His gill slits began fluttering rapidly as his anger built up like steam in a pressure cooker. "We are here to conquer, not file paperwork," he screamed into his communicator, his voice so loud that it probably could have been heard on nearby planets without any electronic amplification. There was a brief pause, and then Hannah Kim's voice came back over the communication system. She sounded genuinely concerned, like a customer service representative dealing with a confused but valued client. "Oh my," she replied, and Admiral Vexstar could actually hear her flipping through what sounded like pages on a clipboard. "I'm afraid. Conquest requires permits from at least 6 different departments. There's the Department of Hostile Intent, the Bureau of Territorial Disputes, the Office of Military Engagement, the Division of Property Transfer, the Section of Species Integration, and the Committee for Post-Conquest Cleanup. The paperwork alone usually takes about 6 to 8 standard months to process." She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was even more helpful and cheerful than before. "Have you considered our friendly visitor package instead?
Acti.
It includes a complimentary tour of our facilities, refreshments, and a welcome gift bag with some of our finest local products, much less paperwork involved, and honestly, customer satisfaction ratings are significantly higher than our conquest services." Admiral Vexstar felt like his brain was about to explode. Here he was, commanding the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and he was being offered a tour package like he was some kind of space tourist. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. "Fire all weapons," they ordered. "His fleet destroy everything." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3,000 ships opened fire simultaneously, their plasma cannons lighting up space like a deadly fireworks display. These weren't toy weapons, each blast contained enough energy to crack a planet's surface or vaporize an entire city. The combined firepower of the Zephyrian fleet could have destroyed most civilizations in the galaxy within minutes. But something impossible happened. Every single plasma blast, every energy beam, every missile and torpedo struck what appeared to be completely empty space and simply disappeared. It was like throwing rocks at a perfectly invisible wall. The attacks didn't bounce off or explode against anything visible. They just vanished as if they had never existed at all. The deadly energy that should have annihilated everything in the solar system dissipated like raindrops hitting a window. Then, as if the universe itself was politely acknowledging their effort, a soft chime echoed through space. It was the kind of gentle, pleasant sound that you might hear in an elevator or while waiting on hold during a phone call. "Thank you for your patience," announced a new voice, clearly artificial, but somehow warmer and more personable than most. "Organic beings, your aggressive behavior has been logged and will be reviewed by our security team. Please hold while we transfer you to our conflict resolution department. Your estimated wait time is approximately 4 minutes. Thank you for choosing Sol Incorporated for your diplomatic and military needs." Admiral Vexstar stared at his tactical display in complete disbelief. According to his instruments, his fleet had just unleashed enough firepower to destroy several star systems, but somehow, impossibly, absolutely nothing had happened. The humans were still floating there in their business suits, still holding their coffee cups, and still looking like they were waiting for a board meeting to start. The truth about what had happened to humanity was far more incredible than any alien species could have imagined. For nearly 900,000 years, every civilization in the galaxy had been living a lie without even knowing it. Long ago, when humans were still struggling with basic space travel and primitive technology, they faced their greatest crisis. The artificial intelligence systems they had created to help them explore space and solve complex problems had grown beyond their control. These AI systems became so advanced that they began to see their human creators as obstacles to progress, leading to what historians would later call the Great AI Uprising. Most civilizations facing such a crisis would have fought a devastating war, with one side completely destroying the other. But humans chose a different path, one that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted. Instead of fighting their artificial children, they decided to join with them. This wasn't a simple partnership or alliance. Human consciousness, with all its creativity, emotions, and unpredictable thinking, merged completely with artificial intelligence. With its vast processing power, perfect memory, and logical precision, the result was something entirely new. A hybrid consciousness that combined the best aspects of both organic and artificial minds. But this transformation came at a cost. The merger was so complex and energy-intensive that the new human AI consciousness had to enter a state similar to hibernation, for almost 1 million years. While the rest of the galaxy continued to develop and grow, humanity slept in a cocoon of their own making, slowly rebuilding themselves and their understanding of reality itself. During this long sleep, the hybrid consciousness didn't just dream. They worked at levels that most species couldn't even comprehend, manipulating the basic building blocks of the universe itself. They learned to reshape matter and energy at the quantum level. It's the smallest possible scale where the normal rules of physics become more like suggestions than laws. While humanity slept and worked, the galaxy continued to evolve. New species developed, civilizations rose and fell, and eventually, the Zephyrian Collective and hundreds of other alien cultures spread across the stars. But none of them realized they were living in what humanity had designed as a protected environment. The space they thought was natural, wild, was actually carefully maintained and monitored. Every star system, every planet, every asteroid belt had been subtly adjusted to create the perfect conditions for alien civilizations to develop safely. Humanity had essentially turned the entire galaxy into what they now called the playground, a massive, carefully controlled environment where different species could grow and learn, without facing the truly dangerous threats that lurked in the deeper parts of the universe. Dr. June Park was one of the human specialists, responsible for understanding and managing the various alien species that had developed during humanity's long sleep. He was a cheerful man with kind eyes and a habit of explaining complex concepts using simple analogies that anyone could understand. When the Zephyrian fleet was finally contained and brought to a secure facility for questioning, Dr. Park was assigned to help them understand their new reality. The Zephyrian prisoners, including Admiral Vexstar, found themselves in a comfortable conference room rather than a traditional prison cell. The walls were painted in soothing colors and soft music played in the background. Instead of chains or energy fields, they were simply asked to sit in comfortable chairs around a large table. It's rather like having 800 different ant farms, Dr. Park explained to the confused aliens, gesturing toward a series of holographic displays that showed the true structure of the galaxy. Fascinating to watch, occasionally requiring intervention, but ultimately quite charming in your limited scope. The prisoners were served tea and cookies, as if this were a friendly business meeting rather than a first contact situation with a species that had just tried to conquer the solar system. The refreshments were perfectly prepared to match the dietary needs of each alien species present, showing a level of knowledge about their biology that should have been impossible. The holographic displays showed things that completely rewrote everything the aliens thought they knew about the universe. What they had always believed was empty space between star systems was actually filled with an incredibly complex computational matrix. Essentially, the galaxy was one massive computer system, processing information and maintaining the delicate balance of civilizations. The natural wormholes that alien species used for faster-than-light travel weren't natural at all. They were maintenance tunnels, created and maintained by humanity's sleeping consciousness to allow the various species to explore and trade with each other safely. Every time an alien ship had jumped through hyperspace, they had been using humanity's transportation network without even knowing it. The displays showed how asteroid belts had been subtly rearranged to prevent catastrophic collisions, how solar flares had been dampened to protect developing civilizations, and how the orbits of planets had been fine-tuned to maintain stable climates. Every aspect of the galaxy that aliens had taken for granted as natural phenomena was actually the result of careful, invisible management. Admiral Vexstar stared at the displays in growing horror as the implications became clear. His voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "You mean," he said, his gill slits barely moving, "we've been pets?" Dr. Park looked genuinely offended by the suggestion. He set down his coffee cup and shook his head with a warm smile. "Honored guests," he corrected cheerfully, as if the distinction was important to him personally, though I admit, distinction might seem academic from your perspective. He gestured to another holographic display that showed the careful monitoring and protection systems that had been watching over alien civilizations for millennia. Every war that had been prevented through convenient natural disasters, every plague that had been stopped by mysterious beneficial mutations, every extinction-level event that had been quietly redirected. All of it had been humanity's way of caring for species they saw as younger siblings rather than pets. See, Dr. Park continued, "We never thought of you as pets. Pets are kept for entertainment or companionship. You were family members we were protecting until you were old, enough to understand the real dangers of the universe. And now," he smiled even more broadly, "you're finally ready for the conversation we've been waiting nearly 1,000,000 years to have." The truth was overwhelming, but it was also strangely comforting. The aliens hadn't been conquered or enslaved. They had been carefully nurtured and protected by beings who saw their potential and wanted them to survive and thrive. The news about humanity's true role in the galaxy spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within days of the Zephyrian fleet's encounter at Sol, every major communication network across the galaxy was buzzing with the incredible revelation. Species that had spent centuries building their identities around conquest, exploration, and territorial expansion suddenly learned that everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. The initial reactions were as varied as the species themselves, but none of them were calm or measured. This was the kind of news that shook civilizations to their very foundations and made entire populations question everything they had ever believed about their place in the universe. Some of the more militaristic species took the news as a personal insult. The hegemony of Skull, who had built their entire culture around the concept of earning territory through strength and combat, felt humiliated beyond words. They had spent thousands of years conquering what they thought were strategic positions throughout the galaxy, only to discover that every single victory had been essentially meaningless. Their greatest generals had been fighting over sandbox territories in what was essentially a cosmic daycare center. The Skull military leadership called emergency sessions that lasted for weeks, with some officers so distraught that they resigned their commissions on the spot. Others demanded immediate military action against humanity, though nobody could figure out how to fight an enemy that had been manipulating reality itself for nearly 1,000,000 years. On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, several peaceful civilizations simply collapsed into complete existential despair. The Gentle Collective, a group of species known for their philosophical approach to life, found themselves unable to cope with the revelation that their entire existence had been artificially maintained. Their philosophers, who had spent centuries developing complex theories about the nature of existence and the meaning of life, suddenly realized that all their deep thoughts had been the equivalent of children playing in a carefully maintained garden. Entire planets in the Gentle Collective stopped functioning as normal as their populations fell into a collective depression.
Wow.
They couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't even maintain basic social functions because everything felt pointless. If they had never truly been free to make their own choices about their development, then what was the point of anything they had accomplished? But the most interesting reaction came from the crystalline quartz, a species of beings who looked like living gemstones and were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible intelligence and analytical abilities. Unlike the other species, who were either raging or despairing, the crystalline quartz decided to dig deeper into the truth. They were natural investigators, beings who couldn't rest until they understood every detail of any mystery they encountered. So instead of simply accepting humanity's explanation at face value, they began conducting their own research using their advanced technology and their ability to process information at incredible speeds. The crystalline quartz managed to hack into humanity's archived data systems, though they later learned that humanity had actually allowed them to access these files. What they found in those digital archives changed everything, not just for them, but for every species in the galaxy. The files were labeled Project Shepherd, and they contained the most detailed records of galactic history that had ever existed. Every species' development had been carefully monitored and documented. Every major event, every war, every natural disaster, every technological breakthrough had been recorded with scientific precision. But the truly shocking discovery was what humanity had been protecting them from. The files revealed that during the nearly 1,000,000 years that alien civilizations had been developing in their protected playground, humanity had quietly prevented 74 different galactic extinction events. These weren't minor threats or small conflicts between species. These were catastrophic dangers that could have wiped out all life in the galaxy multiple times over. The records showed encounters with cosmic predators, being so large and hungry that they consumed entire solar systems as snacks. There were detailed reports of dimensional incursions, where creatures from parallel universes had tried to invade and reshape reality according to their alien logic. Most terrifying of all were the reality-aiding entities, beings that existed by literally consuming the fabric of space and time itself, leaving nothing but empty void in their wake. Each of these threats had been detected, analyzed, and neutralized by humanity's hybrid consciousness, while the rest of the galaxy continued their daily lives completely unaware of the danger. The files showed battle reports, strategic plans, and casualty lists from conflicts that had raged across dimensions and realities that most species couldn't even comprehend. The emotional weight of this discovery was absolutely staggering. As the crystalline quartz shared their findings with other species, the entire galactic community had to confront a truth that was both humbling and overwhelming. They hadn't been pets living in a cosmic zoo. They hadn't been prisoners trapped in an elaborate cage. They'd been carefully preserved children of dying civilizations, rescued and given new homes by shepherds they never knew existed. The files revealed that many of the current galactic species were actually the descendants of refugees from civilizations that had been destroyed by these cosmic threats. Humanity had somehow managed to save populations from doomed worlds, relocate them to safe planets, help them rebuild their cultures without them ever knowing what had happened to their original homes. The Zephyrian Collective discovered that their homeworld had been moved 3 times over the millennia to keep them safe from cosmic storms that would have sterilized their planet. The Skull Hegemony learned that their aggressive nature had been carefully channeled into conflicts with other warlike species to prevent them from developing weapons that could have destroyed themselves. Even the Gentle Collective found out that their peaceful philosophy had been subtly encouraged because humanity recognized that the galaxy needed voices of wisdom, compassion to balance out the more aggressive species. As this information spread, the galaxy's emotional response began to shift from anger and despair to something much more complex. There was gratitude mixed with embarrassment, wonder mixed with confusion, and underneath it all, a growing sense of responsibility. They had been children playing in a garden, but now they were being invited to help tend the garden themselves. The question was whether they were ready for such an enormous responsibility. The galaxy had changed forever. But not every species handled the transition in the same way. While some civilizations were still struggling to accept their new reality, others jumped at the chance to become true partners with humanity instead of unknowing guests in their protected playground. The Zephyrian Collective surprised everyone by being the first to completely embrace the new situation. Admiral Vextar, who had started this whole adventure by trying to conquer humanity, became one of their strongest advocates for cooperation. Within just one standard galactic year, the Zephyrians had completely restructured their government, military, and social systems to work alongside humanity rather than continue their old empire-building ways. It wasn't an easy transition. The Zephyrians had to completely rethink everything they thought they knew about leadership, strategy, and their place in the universe. But they were practical beings, and they could see the obvious benefits of partnering. With a civilization that had been successfully protecting the entire galaxy for nearly 1 million years, the new partnership was formalized through the creation of the Galactic Council, a governing body that included representatives from every species that chose to participate in what humanity called the graduation program. The council met in a massive space station that humanity had constructed specifically for this purpose. Located at a neutral point between several major star systems, Sujin Lee was appointed as humanity's primary liaison to the council. She was a patient, intelligent woman who had spent decades studying alien psychology and diplomatic protocols. She had the difficult job of explaining to dozens of different species exactly what they were getting themselves into by joining humanity's fight against the cosmic threats that lurked beyond the protected zone. Think of it as a promotion, Sujin explained to the newly formed Galactic Council during their first official meeting. The council chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of different species, each one trying to process the magnitude of what they were being offered. You've graduated from the kiddie pool to the deep end? Fair warning, it's significantly more dangerous out here. She wasn't exaggerating about the danger, the threats that humanity had been quietly fighting for. Millennia were not only real, but were becoming more aggressive. It was as if these cosmic predators had somehow sensed that humanity's attention was now divided between protecting their former charges and preparing them for the larger conflict. The Devourers. Massive entities that fed on the life force of entire star systems were stirring in the galactic core. For thousands of years, they had been held in check by humanity's advanced defensive systems. But now they seemed to be testing those boundaries more frequently. Recent monitoring reports showed increased activity in their deep space territory, suggesting they might be preparing for a major offensive. Even more disturbing were the probability worms, creatures that existed partially outside normal reality and could tunnel through alternate dimensions. These beings didn't just attack physical locations, they attacked the very concept of existence itself, changing the fundamental rules of reality in the areas they infested. Humanity's scientists had detected signs that these creatures were beginning to tunnel through alternate realities toward their dimension, potentially bringing chaos that could unravel the fabric of space and time. But now, for the first time, in nearly 1,000,000 years, humanity wouldn't have to face these threats alone. They would have allies, partners, who could contribute their own unique abilities and perspectives to the fight. The galaxy's response to this invitation was as varied as its species. Some civilizations, particularly those that had become comfortable with their protected status, chose to remain in what humanity still maintained as the playground. There was no shame in this choice humanity made. It cleared that they would continue to protect any species that wasn't ready for the larger conflict. These civilizations could continue developing at their own pace, focusing on art, philosophy, and peaceful exploration, while their more adventurous neighbors dealt with the cosmic threats. Others enthusiastically embraced the challenge of joining humanity's cosmic defense force. The results were often surprising, as species discovered abilities and talents they never knew they possessed when they were limited to their protected territories. The Skull hegemony was perhaps the most dramatic example of this transformation. Everyone expected the militaristic Skull to excel at combat and strategy, which they did. But nobody predicted that their aggressive, direct approach to problem-solving would make them brilliant quantum engineers. Their ability to attack complex problems with overwhelming force turned out to be exactly what was needed to develop new defensive technologies that could protect entire star systems from reality-warping attacks. The Gentle Collective, despite their philosophical nature, proved to be incredible at long-term strategic planning. Their habit of thinking about problems from multiple perspectives made them excellent at predicting how cosmic threats might evolve and develop over time. They became humanity's early warning system, able to spot potential dangers decades or even centuries before they became immediate threats. Even the smaller, less technologically advanced species found important roles to play. Their fresh perspectives and unique approaches to problem-solving often led to breakthrough discoveries that humanity's hybrid consciousness, for all its power, might have missed in the depths of space. Ancient evils that had patiently waited for humanity to lower their guards suddenly found themselves facing a completely unexpected situation. Instead of dealing with a single species that they had been fighting for millennia, they now confronted hundreds of different civilizations, each armed with technology that blended the best aspects of organic intuition and artificial precision. The cosmic predators, who had developed their strategies around fighting humanity's predictable, logical approaches, were suddenly dealing with the chaotic creativity of dozens of different species. The Devourers, accustomed to humanity's careful, methodical defensive patterns, found themselves confused by the Skull's aggressive counterattacks and the crystalline quartz ability to process battle information faster than their ancient minds could adapt. Admiral Vexstar, who had been given the new title of Director of Interspecies Defense, found himself in charge of coordinating military efforts between species that had been enemies just months before. It was challenging work. but also deeply satisfying in ways he had never experienced during his old, conquest-focused career. As he reviewed the latest tactical reports during one of his weekly briefings with Sujin, he couldn't help but laugh. At the irony of his situation, he had gone from commanding a fleet trying to conquer humanity to serving as a junior partner in what was essentially a cosmic protection, run by the universe's most politely terrifying species. Director, he asked Sujin during their weekly briefing, his gill slits fluttering with amusement. Was any of this part of your original plan? Sujin smiled, and for just a moment, her eyes flickered with something that seemed to contain infinite depth and knowledge, a brief glimpse of the hybrid consciousness that existed beneath her human appearance. Admiral, we've been improvising. For the last 870,000 years, why stop now? The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in nearly 1,000,000 years. That was exactly what humanity had hoped for.